Welcome to Blind Astrology. Before I introduce this first post, I want to make a note of a mistake that I made at about 9 minutes into the video. I say that Jupiter is exalted in Capricorn, and that was a misspeaking. I should have said Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, the sign of nurturing. And now to introduce this first episode, today's chart is for January 3rd, 2026, and it's 9:02 in the morning, Raleigh, North Carolina. And I recorded the audio at about 9:40 in the morning in my kitchen in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so in this episode, I talk about all the planets in the chart for today, January 3rd, 2026, except for the planet Uranus. And in talking about where all the planets are in the chart today, I weave in my thoughts about Mikhail Gorbachev, because I'm reading a biography of him right now, some thoughts about anarchy, which is appropriate during this time that we have 4 planets in Capricorn and Pluto in Aquarius. And towards the end of the video, I talk about Neptune passing from Pisces into Aries and how that is related to the beginning of the American Civil War. And then I'm hoping in a week to have another episode to upload. And I would like to talk a little bit more about the word anarchy in the next episode and why this podcast is called Blind Astrology. So, on with the show. Are you feeling under pressure? Are you feeling the challenge of Mars right next to the Sun and Venus? What's happening is, as we are circling around the Sun, we are seeing the Sun catching up to Mars. And Venus is on the far side of the Sun, lining up with the Sun. So we've got this really interesting lineup. Sometimes I picture a horse race, and you can either imagine the horse race from above the track. You can imagine watching the horse race from one side of the track, outside the whole track. You can imagine watching the horse race from the middle of the track, which is kind of like how we do the chart. It's like we picture ourselves in the middle of everything. And when we picture ourselves in the middle of all of what's going on, then we see the Sun going around us. So there's all kinds of ways to visualize the way the planets are lining up in the solar system. You could even use the galactic equator, the galactic plane, as your frame of reference, but we're not going to get into that today. So I'm recording this post as the morning begins, after having spent the night with a customer last night who is like in her late 80s, and her husband was in the hospital because he couldn't breathe. And I've got another customer that can't breathe, and her husband is also having medical problems. And so I'm just really aware of, aside from the pressure that we're feeling when we see what's happening in the world news, like I have not even read the articles about the capture of Maduro yet because I'm so busy with my own personal work crises. And then I look at that lineup of Mars, Sun, and Venus all right super next to each other in Capricorn. And I cannot help associating the pressure, the challenge that I feel with the challenge associated with that kind of lineup. We've got Venus, the planet of kindness, lined up with the Sun, the ego or spirit, all those both planets coming in to meet with Mars, the planet of crisis, of the ultimate challenge of life, of do or die. And when I say die, I mean die. We're talking about the planet of kindness and our spiritual, our egos. And when I say ego, you really want to remember that ego is just a Greek, it's also Latin. It's just a Greek word for I, our sense of our own individuality. So our inner sense of kindness is lining up with our sense of individuality, what makes us who we are as individuals. And both of those planets are lining up with the planet of war. Mars is war, survival. And then right across from them on the other side of the chart in Cancer, whenever you think of Capricorn, you should always think of Cancer being on the opposite side. Capricorn, the sign of setting limits in the northern hemisphere, it's associated with winter. In the southern hemisphere, they're having summer right now. But Western astrology is, for the most part, a northern hemisphere language. So we have to remember, as we're talking about this, we're really talking, using a language that when we say Capricorn, we've got to remember that the limits of what this language works in are the northern hemisphere. If we want to extend this language to the southern hemisphere, then we've got to learn how to flip everything in our minds and remember that in the southern hemisphere, they're not experiencing the season of austerity. They're not experiencing winter. They're experiencing summer and this rush of life. But anyway, I digress as usual. But that's not total digression, because what I was talking about is Cancer on the opposite side of Capricorn. Cancer, which is what they are experiencing in the southern hemisphere. Cancer, the sign of intense life, the sign of nurturing. Cancer is associated with motherhood, as Capricorn is associated with fatherhood. Capricorn, the sign of setting limits, versus Cancer, the sign of nurturing, of supporting life. Austerity, Capricorn, plenty, Cancer. And the moon, which today is in the sign Cancer. As I'm making this recording, the moon is only 4 or 5 degrees away from lining up with Jupiter, the great benefic. Jupiter is exalted in the sign Capricorn, so that means it doesn't have power, but it gets a lot of praise. But the moon actually rules in Cancer. The moon is the mother. The moon rules in the sign of nurturing. The mother rules in the sign Cancer. The mother rules in the home where she or he is supporting the life of the people around them, supporting the life of not just people around them, but anyone that they are connected with, anyone that the mothering figure is taking care of. So this morning on one side of the chart, we can see this triad with a fourth member on the edges, and there's actually a fifth member, Pluto, at the very beginning of Aquarius. So on the opposite side of this 5-planet group of austerity, this group of 5 planets in the sign of sober austerity are opposing or opposed by, you could put it both ways depending on how you look at it, Jupiter, the planet of faith and taking chances in the sign of nurturing, and then the moon lining up with Jupiter, giving Jupiter the strength of its power. The moon is supporting faith. The planet, when I say planet of nurturing, I mean the moon lining up with the planet of faith. The planet of faith is Jupiter. So it's like the mother lining up with the teenager. A lot of times when you're using shorthand, it's good to think of Jupiter as the teenager, Saturn as the limiting parent, and Moon as the nurturing parent. So you've got the nurturing parent lining up with the teenager, saying, I support you. I'm with you. I love you. So at the same time this morning, as we see this in the Northern Hemisphere, this group of, this challenging group of planets that are in a crucible, they're in a tight spot. There is not a lot of resources. There are a lot of limits that are unavoidable. They're obstructions that we can do nothing about. It's the same way that there's nothing that we can do to make winter go away. The only way we can deal with winter is to learn how to adjust our lives, learn how to manage what resources we do have to support our lives. And then those 5 planets of us in the place of austerity on the opposite side of the chart, where we see Jupiter and the moon just under the horizon. They have just set before I started making this recording at 9:50 in the morning, Saturday, January 3rd. The moon and Jupiter in Cancer in the 6th house of the student, right after everything sets, whatever is just under the western horizon is in the 6th house of the student. So the moon and Jupiter are in the 6th house of the student. And so they're passing through this area of the chart where we're learning about life. And what's in that section of the chart right now, as I'm recording this, is that pair of planets for the Northern Hemisphere in the sign of nurturing, saying, we can love each other. We do love each other. Which brings me to a really good book I'm reading right now. It's a biography of Gorbachev. And I'm about halfway through the book, and I'm coming to the part where you can tell that things are about to fall apart. It's 1988, and they're in the middle of perestroika, and the counter-revolution is gathering. The people that do not want perestroika are starting to gain power, and the weaknesses that Gorbachev has are beginning to show in the book. The whole first, fourth of the book, where you're reading about Gorbachev growing up and his family, He's got this incredible father that just went through absolute hell during the Stalin years. Like, I'm talking gulag hell. The family having and this farming family having their father and grandfather, I'm talking about Gorbachev's father and his grandfather, gone for long periods, either because of having to fight in World War II or because of being sent away because they were not towing the line, or being accused by the government of not towing the communist line, not being the good farmers serving the state that they were supposed to be. So we're in the beginning of the book reading all about the heroism of the family that Gorbachev grew up in, and you get this picture of his father, who is very sane, very kind. He's a pillar in his community, because no matter what happens, no matter what this repressive state throws at them, how this repressive state tears at the fabric of the community by sending hardworking people away to Siberia, no matter what this government throws at him, Gorbachev's father is a kind, community-spirited man that everyone looks up to. When anybody in the community has a problem, they know they can go to Gorbachev's father and they will get sane support from his father. His father works hard. Gorbachev learns everything about farming machinery and being a hard worker from the kind example of his father. But now I'm in the middle of the book where Gorbachev is no longer in the farming community that he grew up in. He's no longer in Stavropol, the area where his family is, in the area where his family is. He's now in Moscow. And you can just see in every conversation that's recorded of meetings of the Politburo how psychologically, and this is a very judgmental word to use, but I'm going to use it anyway because I can't think of a better way right now to say it, psychologically stunted these people in Moscow who are running the state are. And Gorbachev, you would think, because of the family, because of the father that he grew up with, would be able to rise above this. And Gorbachev wants to so badly. He loves Western culture. He is a very well-educated man who loves culture and wants to open things up. And he really believes doing that is going to help people. But you can tell with the conversations that recorded that he's had that he can be just as nasty as the rest of these people in Moscow are to each other. And it's just so sad to read about and kind of watch. And as I'm reading this sad part of his life where I know things are going to start going downhill, and I'm thinking about everything my customers are going through and ways that I am failing to be as supportive as I want to be, in ways that I'm being testy and making nasty, I can veil it as much as I want to, but I can get really nasty when I'm under pressure. As I'm home, away from the pressure, and thinking of all these things, books that I read years ago about anarchy, I'm thinking of the word anarchy, and I'm thinking of the word anabasis and anatomy, and thinking about how the word anarchy, sometimes I think it means going back from or rejecting what the original rule was. Arche basically means the old way, like archaeology. And for many recent years, I have thought of anarchy as being, okay, we are rejecting the old ways. But now, today, I'm thinking of anarchy as saying going back, like Anabasis. They're going back from having, Anabasis is the story where I think it's Xenophon wrote it. I'm not sure if I'm remembering that right. But he's writing about all these Greeks that went to support Cyrus in Persia. And they went down and did battle with him, and Cyrus is killed, and they get really messed up by the person that took over from Cyrus. And they're having to go back from this journey that they've made into Persia. And so the name of the book is Anabasis. They're returning. So, and then anatomy is another example to kind of get closer to a better understanding of this word anarchy that like really presses a lot of scary buttons for people. So the word anatomy, tomi in Greek, means cutting something up. And anatomy is like when you take something that you've cut it up and you put it back to the way it was before. Imagining people slaughtering animals and what is it? Not when they're inspecting their innards to see how healthy this animal was before they sacrifice it. So in anatomy, we're taking the pieces and we're putting them back together as the way they were before we cut the pieces up. So to me, now I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Anarchy isn't so much rejecting the rule of the past as it is saying, let's go back to before the rule of the past. And I can see where to some people that would kind of automatically be thought of as chaos. But I think if we just consider it as a word and go back to like dissecting that word and putting it back together and thinking of what people might be saying that's not so scary when they use that word. And I'm not implying that we should all be comfortable with people who are calling themselves anarchists, that are generating a lot of chaos, that are using a lot of violence that we don't feel good about, that's harming people. That's not necessarily what anarchy is all about. We can look at this word and see it as possibly an expression that says, let's look at the way things were before this rule that is holding sway over us. And that brings me to Saturn coming up to Neptune, which you can see at the bottom of the chart. Saturn's coming really close to Neptune, and they are both at the very end of Pisces. And Neptune is about to cross into Aries, and Saturn is going to be right behind it. And the last time Neptune crossed into the sign Aries was about 150 years ago. It was precisely the week that Fort Sumter fell. It was the very beginning of the American Civil War. So this is kind of like the astrological, the Neptunian birthday, the Neptunian versary. When we say anniversary, we're talking about the Earth going around the sun. But if we say Neptuneversary, we're talking about the cycle of Neptune going around the sun. So we're coming up to the place in time when Neptune is where it was in the tropical zodiac when the Civil War started. So I'm not implying that we're going to have another civil war. I'm just saying that this is something to think about. That when you think about Aries as the sign of the exploding seed, the sign of war, that when Neptune went into the sign of Aries, the exploding seed in the 1860s, it was the beginning of the American Civil War. And now here we are over 150 years later with Neptune going into Aries for the first time since it did that. But right now, still today, Saturn and Neptune are in the sign Pisces. And they're still, even though things are moving fast, even though it's like we're at the top of Niagara Falls and we can feel that incredible power sucking us over the falls, there's nothing we can do to avoid going over Niagara Falls right now. But then you got to remember, I'm going to slip this in here because it's just so important. In the southern hemisphere, they are experiencing Saturn and Neptune in the sign Virgo, which is a totally different energy. It's the energy of the student. So I don't feel like Western astrology has come anywhere near what we need or what I would like to see it do in integrating thinking of the zodiac as being a northern and southern hemisphere thing. So when I throw these things in, I have really not integrated them into my thought process yet. But as I record these things, it just keeps popping up in my mind. We need to remember that while we in the Northern Hemisphere are experiencing this Niagara Falls moment, in the Southern Hemisphere, Saturn and Neptune are actually at the end of Virgo, the sign of the student. But for me, sitting in my kitchen in Raleigh, North Carolina, I feel like, to me, it's the whole world is, or at least my nation is getting sucked over Niagara Falls. And I'm looking at those 5 planets in the austere signs of Capricorn and Aquarius, and the 2 planets on the other side in Cancer. And I'm thinking about the life of Gorbachev and what everybody in Russia and the Soviet Union has been going through for the same period as us. During the same years that we were fighting the Civil War in Russia, they were dealing with freeing the people that were slaves on farms. I can't think of the word, the serfs. At the same time, we in the United States were fighting a civil war about people being able to own slaves. Russia was going through a very, very similar crisis with freeing the serfs from farms. So I'm thinking about both great nations and what we've been through, and how people that I certainly admire Gorbachev. When I read about his family and I read about his beginning, I just think, what a wonderful man from a wonderful family. And it's so hard to see what I can tell is to look forward to what I know is going to happen. But I think of the soul, which is associated with the moon. And how this is what life is all about. This is change. This is people working together. We're not rocks. We live and die and we procreate. And it's through that process of living and dying and procreating that we learn together. We remember what happened in the past and we learn from what happened in the past. And we remember that no matter how much we learn, we will never know everything. We must always strive, but we have to remember that we are not infinity, which is what basically Spinoza said God is. All right, I'm going to stop there. This is Our Sky Astrology. Bye.